Hey, what is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Kieron Gillen's Image-published comic book, Die, as you can see here. So here is the spine of the book, which features some dissected polyhedrals that basically, if you were to fold those together, they would form what make up the D&D dice. And here is the back of the book. Nothing much except a little blurb to tell us what this is about, of course. But therein lies one of the $2 million questions, the first being, what is this book about? And the second being, is this worth picking up? Well, this is an homage to fantasy role-playing games, sort of more specifically Dungeons & Dragons, but that is a proprietary property, so they can't really just go around saying it is Dungeons & Dragons in here. But basically, it's like in the 90s, there were these 6 teenagers who they were going to play this D&D game, this role-playing game. They were going to have a good time. It was going to be immersive. It was going to be something special. And it ended up being this game that they get trapped into. They get sucked into it, almost like the modern versions of Jumanji, but throw a Dungeons & Dragons medieval overlay on that. What's interesting here and makes for some unique storytelling where things are unfolding and we're learning more and more as the story progresses is that initial time our cast of characters was sucked into the game is not what this story is. It's actually 25 years later where they encounter the die that sort of caused all this, and they get sucked in one more time, and they have to now, with their adult minds, navigate sort of what they did when they were younger. You know, a lot of the impulsiveness that they did inside this fantasy world has had lasting consequences that they have to face, etc., etc. And there is a way out of this. They know the way out of this because they've been in this world before. They have lost real time being stuck in this world before, but there are of course some complications for them getting out that I won't spoil here. But even as they figure that out, there are further and further complications. It just turns into this rabbit hole of nightmare fantasy fuel, and it is a ton of fun. And there is a lot of nightmarish elements to it as well. I do want to add that. Something I noticed that Gillen does really well in his book here, and by the way, I picked this up because 1, I love Gillen, and 2, I've been a lifelong Dungeons & Dragons player, so I thought it was a perfect matchup. And, you know, of course, I'm a lifelong comic book fan as well, so it's a bunch of things I love thrown in here. Anyway, back to my original point, Gillen really emphasizes the nightmare situation it would be for NPCs living in a world like this that is non-player characters, and how they basically just have to deal with everything that the players do, the destruction they leave in their wake. And this time around, you know, our adults team coming through, they're a little more receptive to that. They sort of, at one point, they're trying to almost approach this like humanitarians and do everything with, you know, very, very expressive intent and whatnot to make sure there's not a lot of fallout. But, you know, things, like I said, go awry anyway. Gillen is so good with the characters here that you really feel for each one of them, and it's something special with this book too, because 1, like I said, it's a comic book, and it's a comic book about fantasy role-playing games, and those are kind of 2 mediums that have always been, you know, sort of where outcasts get drawn to sometimes. I don't mean that in any derogatory sense. I did as well. Just people who, you know, sort of maybe feel like they don't fit into a lot of the norms or whatever. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but we've basically got a cast of characters like that who all have their unique nuances within that, you know, because that's such a vague blanket to throw for people. You're an outcast, you know, but there's so many little nuances, and we're all really outcasts in our own ways anyway. But I just really liked exploring in this book each character's, you know, unique problems that they're dealing with, the ways they express themselves, and sort of the lessons that they have to learn as they move through this journey. I just thought it was really beautiful. So we've got great characters. As you can see, there is some fantastic artwork going on. This is not sort of a art style that I'm used to seeing in comics, but I really, really like how it's applied here. I can tell they had a lot of fun with the fantasy world building here, and it is also really well done, and like I said, it kind of unravels in a really satisfying way in this story. The entire story is just paced really well, I think. I was also surprised at the amount of meta, real-world historical commentary that there is in here. I mean, there's clear allusions to things like World War I, and Gillen has his things to say about that and the atrocities of such things, which was also really interesting to read about in this book and see it in a different light as we're in this sort of fantasy world where the characters are like having this moral consideration of these things are real, these people are real, they matter, or this is just some twisted game we're trapped in, we can kill whoever we want, and sort of those two things grappling against each other. And that's something I should mention too, since I mentioned that the characters are all outcasts, but they've got their own nuances and are different within being an outcast, and along with that comes the difference of opinion. So not every character here thinks that they should be doing what they do in such specific ways, etc., etc. I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil any of the big twists or anything, but let's just say there are some major differences of opinions between the characters. Now, I do want to give a slight breakdown of our characters since they've kind of got cool gimmicks to them, i.e. their classes, which if you're familiar with D&D, there would be like the warrior class, the bard class, the cleric class, etc., etc. But for here, it's a little bit different. So first up, we have our central protagonist, who is Dominic, who in the real world is just, a marketing dude who's married, and, he was the best friend of the dude who got them transported into this universe. But within the actual game, he plays a woman who her class is Dictator, which I think what Gillen said about the Dictator class is that basically it's what a bard in Dungeons & Dragons would be if everyone was petrified of bards. Then there is Angela, who is Ash's younger sister, and has this kind of cyberpunk style character, and she's got her cyberpunk companion, and they do some really interesting stuff with that character too, which again I won't spoil, but you guys should definitely check this one out. There's a lot of great little details and character moments in here. Then there is Isabel, who plays this character in the class, I guess, of Godbinder, which was really, really cool. I really enjoyed it. Every scene with this character I thought was so much fun, and basically what it was is this character who was basically just making deals with gods to get what she wanted. So in an instance where, there's maybe a giant dragon attacking, she would have to, call out to this god, make some collective bargain with them, and then, use whatever power they gifted her with or whatever circumstance they gifted her with to her advantage. And she just is really, really interesting. It's hard to do her justice just speaking about her, but in the book you'll notice how cool her power is. There's also Matt, who is a grief knight, which is also really cool and fascinating, I thought, and just kind of a good exploration of trauma in a way that is kind of a thinly veiled metaphor, but intentionally, so it's really cool. Anyway, his power kind of stems from sadness, despair, grief, him channeling those things into power and strength. So in order to get that power and strength, he has to be feeling those emotions. So kind of a double-edged sword, but makes for really interesting content here. And then there's Chuck, who is just the fool who does reckless things. He's kind of like the murder hobo. If you are a Dungeons & Dragons player who's familiar with that term for players, basically means somebody who's not really super invested in the role-playing aspect and actually playing the game with the core mechanics and everything, but kind of just wants to go run around in a sandbox world and kill things. So that's what he is. And again, he also is one of those characters that gets really great insight into why he is the way he is, and we get to explore a lot about him, which was really nice. And then there's Solomon, who is the reason that they got sucked into the game in the first place, and this is all I'll say about him. He's also the reason that they get sucked back into the game. I'll leave it at that because I want you to read this one. I highly recommend it. I think it's fun for people who even have not played a fantasy role-playing game. It's you don't need, to play a role-playing game to know, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or any other big fantasy thing. So yeah, let me know if you guys are picking this one up. If you've read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Please try to be a little light on spoilers in the comments for those who haven't read it. But with that, thank you guys so much. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and you have a great rest of your day.